Well, Britain held a snap election this week, 3 years ahead of schedule. The early election was called by Prime Minister Theresa May with the aim of winning strong backing for her government during the upcoming negotiations in Brussels on the country's exit from the European Union. But that's not exactly how it turned out. Here's Prime Minister May speaking to Parliament about why this election was so important.
I believe it is in Britain's national interest to hold an election now. A general election is the best way to strengthen Britain's hand in the negotiations ahead, because securing the right deal for Britain is my priority, and I'm confident that we have the plan to do it.
So all 650 seats in the House of Commons, the lower house of Parliament, were up for election Thursday. The party needs to win 326 seats to form a majority government. The terror attacks in London and Manchester obviously overshadowed the late stages of political campaigning. Some of the campaigning was actually suspended. And obviously May's calculations appear to have backfired in spectacular fashion. So for the latest now, as we go to air on the outcome of this British election, we are joined from our London studio by VOA European correspondent Henry Ridgwell. It's been a busy, long night for you. Can't wait to talk to you. And once again, obviously, by VOA White House Bureau Chief Steve Herman for the geopolitical side of all this. My thanks to both of you. Henry, so I'm assuming that most of the ballots are in now, but it seems Theresa May made a huge gamble and is probably very sorry that she did. What can you tell us? What's the latest from there?
A huge gamble, which, as you saw in that clip of her in the House of Commons, saying that Britain needed some form of stability to take forward into the Brexit negotiations. Well, they've got completely the opposite now. They've got a period of distinct instability as her government tries to work out a way in which it can retain some kind of power, some kind of stability to take forward. And the only way it seems that she can do that at the moment is to work with one of the other small parties, the Democratic Unionist Party, a party from Northern Ireland, which had been sharing power there. They are also pro-Brexit. They want Britain to leave the European Union, so there is common ground between the two parties. They currently hold now 10 seats in Parliament. So even still, the government's working majority would be wafer thin. And in fact, Theresa May would just rely on the Democratic Unionist Party on an ad hoc basis, vote by vote. So it would be very difficult for her to push through the kind of legislation, the kind of changes to Britain that we're going to see over the next 2 years as Brexit negotiations take place. So
Henry, we're likely to see a lot of backroom dealing here. I mean, May started out with 330 seats, which was barely a majority. Can she still lead the country without a majority? What actually happens next? What does she have to do to become the next the Prime Minister?
Well, in what to many viewers will probably seem a piece of archaic British arrangement, she has to basically persuade the Queen, the monarch, that she can form a stable government. She's already visited the Queen this morning to request permission to do that. And I think over the weekend, over the next 2 or 3 days, talks are going to take place between her and the Democratic Unionist Party, who, as I said, have these 10 seats, to see if they can come to an arrangement and make things work. In reality, most analysts think her days are numbered. Most of her party don't want to rock the boat again. This is a devastating blow for the Conservative Party, but they just want a period of stability now to take a breath, calm down, get those Brexit negotiations started, and perhaps in a few months' time in the summer, or perhaps in October after the German elections, which is a completely other story, Britain will look to, or the Conservative Party will look to choose a new leader, and we may go through this all over again. We may be forced to have another general election as another new leader seeks to get a mandate for his or her own vision of Brexit. So we went from, her catchphrase was strong and stable. We've got exactly the opposite. We've got absolute chaos.
Steve Herman, I'm wondering, how does this affect the United States? I mean, Theresa May came to this country a few months ago promising to be a strong ally to Donald Trump. Has Donald Trump lost an ally here?
I think this is not good for the Trump administration. He had the best relationship with May compared to the leaders of the other key European countries. You've got Macron in France and Merkel, as Henry mentioned, up for re-election. It's prudent for her to not be seen as getting too cozy with Trump for domestic political purposes. I was on the trip with the president when he went to NATO and the G7 summit in Sicily. And I wouldn't quite say that it was obvious that relations were frosty with all of those other leaders, but they weren't overly warm. And there's definitely a perception that the United States has stepped aside from its role as the global leader, and leadership is, people in the rest of the world are looking in a different direction, looking to the Germans, which is remarkable. Right. And Macron has been very involved in the diplomacy in recent days with this rising crisis in the Middle East, with Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Iran, which is usually something we would be seeing shuttle diplomacy from the United States. So
there is a strong sense, Steve, among Europeans that we have to go it alone, forget about the United States. They're sort of left in their own world. I'm wondering how this election reverberates around the rest of Europe. As you mentioned, Germany is about to have its own election this fall.
This is a continuation of an earthquake, the echoes from the earthquake that we've seen with the Brexit vote,
yes,
with Duterte in the Philippines, with Trump here in the United States, the election of an outsider who didn't even really have a political party in France. And we are in a global period of political upheaval, for good or for bad, and politicians around the world and those of us in the media need to recognize that things are shifting very quickly.
Political upheaval and an awful lot of uncertainty. Henry, how does Theresa May's weak showing affect Brexit negotiations that are set to begin in just a matter of days?
Well, it depends who you talk to. If you ask on the British side, there are those who did not want to leave the European Union, whose hopes have been stoked today that actually there won't be what's called a hard Brexit, which essentially means leaving every single institution to do with Europe, whether it be the single market, the customs union, all of those benefits that they see that Britain has got from the European Union. On the other hand, if you speak to officials in Brussels, they say, well, we don't care the makeup of the government in Britain. You've already told us you're leaving. The clock is ticking. That clock runs out on March the 30th, 2019. And already Britain has lost 2 months of negotiating time with this election. It seems to be losing more time potentially with this election result now. And the fear is, I think, that the result has increased what's known as a cliff edge scenario, in that the clock just runs out without a deal having been done. You can't extend those talks without unanimous approval from all other 27 EU member states. So on March the 30th, 2019, Britain could just fall out of the EU according to its rules, and nothing would be in place to replace it, which would be a disaster for Britain, and it would also hit the EU economy hard as well.
Okay, we're already seeing reverberations on the global economy. I know the British pound already lost a lot of money. I wish I had more time to discuss this with Henry Ridgwell and Steve Herman. I thank you both. We're going to take another break right now, but when we come back, we look at the state of the world's oceans, which was the focus of a meeting at the United Nations this week. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, a reminder. We want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, and comments on our Facebook page. The address is VOA The Correspondents. We'll be right back.